It's just endlessly fascinating, isn't it?
What's that?
These stories, the ones that sort of pull back the curtain on the darker sides of humanity.
Oh, absolutely. True crime, mysteries.
Yeah, they make you question, well, pretty much everything. Morality, who we think we are, what we believe. They really grip you.
They really do. And within that whole area, cults, they have this uniquely disturbing quality, wouldn't you say? Almost chilling.
Totally chilling, because you're talking about these communities, right? Often built just on charisma.
Charisma, yeah, but also like really clever manipulation and control. Absolute control.
And the outcomes, often just devastating, sometimes fatal.
Exactly. I mean, you just have to say the names, don't you? Jonestown.
Instantly sends a shiver, yeah. Or Heaven's Gate, those eerie videos.
Right. And our sources, the stuff we've been looking at, they really hammer this home.
Eh.
These aren't just, weird historical footnotes.
No, they're like cautionary tales, big ones.
Profound ones. They show how our basic human needs, wanting meaning, wanting to belong somewhere.
That's certainty, right. Everyone wants certainty.
Exactly. How those deep desires can be, well, twisted, weaponized, really, in some pretty insidious ways.
Okay, so that brings us to today. Our mission, really.
Which is?
Your custom deep dive. We've gone through a ton of sources on cults.
Research, articles, analyses.
And we're aiming to pull out the most important bits, the key takeaways, so you can get up to speed on this complex topic fast.
Right. We're going to unpack the psychology. Like, is there a formula for why people join?
And look at these charismatic leaders, how they operate.
Yeah, the mechanics behind that charisma, and then the aftermath, the fallout, which is often just tragic.
So think of this deep dive as your shortcut. We want to give you those surprising facts, those aha moments.
Without it feeling overwhelming.
Exactly. Because this stuff resonates, doesn't it? I mean, who hasn't felt a bit lost sometimes?
Or needed guidance, or just wanted a clear path forward.
Yeah, that vulnerability, it's human. And that makes the psychology here feel, well, uncomfortably relatable.
Deeply relatable. Okay, ready to get into it?
Let's do it. Let's unpack this.
So what's really striking, and you see this again and again in the sources, is that there seems to be this almost consistent psychological formula at play nearly every time.
A formula? Okay. What are the ingredients?
It starts with emotional vulnerability. Someone going through stress, maybe a big life change.
Right, feeling kind of
drift, precisely. And then comes the charismatic leader, who is just masterful at exploiting that vulnerability.
Right.
Then, isolation. Cutting people off from their old lives, old support systems.
Making the group the only reality.
Exactly. And pushing this very black and white thinking. Us versus them, good versus evil.
No room for gray areas.
None. And often there's this overlay of apocalyptic thinking or some kind of intense spiritual ideology. The stakes are incredibly high.
So, okay, if it's not just people being gullible or, having mental illness.
Which is a common misconception, yeah.
What's the core psychological need these cults are tapping into, according to the research? Is it that certainty thing we mentioned, or something else?
That's a really good question, because people are often just looking for answers, aren't they?
Or community, a family, a purpose, especially if they feel like the world outside is confusing or hostile.
Right. And cults offer this incredibly seductive package deal. Instant answers, instant community, like you said, a family, and a powerful mission.
It sounds appealing when you put it like that. Certainty, belonging, purpose.
It is appealing. That's the lure. But, and this is the crucial part the materials emphasize, this gift comes at an enormous cost. Total devotion, unquestioning obedience, giving up your autonomy, and sometimes even self-destruction.
Wow. So how does someone go from being attracted by that initial package?
The belonging, the purpose.
Yeah, to being willing to pay that kind of price. How does that happen?
Well, that's where the leaders come in, the charismatic ones.
The puppet masters, as some sources call them.
Exactly. And they aren't just good talkers. They are masters of psychological exploitation. Really sophisticated techniques.
Like what kind of techniques are we talking about?
Well, there's love bombing, for starters.
Love bombing.
Yeah, just showering new recruits with intense affection, attention, praise, making them feel instantly special, instantly part of the group. It creates this really fast, artificial bond.
Okay, so they reel you in with warmth.
Right. But then, subtly it shifts. They start using gaslighting.
Making you doubt yourself.
Making you doubt your own memory, your perception, even your sanity. reality. So you become totally dependent on the leader's version of reality. What they say is true becomes your truth.
That's insidious.
It is. And then, of course, there's fear. Fear-mongering, keeping followers in line through threats, paranoia about the outside world, fear of leaving.
Wow. Love bombing, gaslighting, fear. Quite the toolkit.
A terrifyingly effective one. And if you look at the big examples, you see these patterns play out so clearly.
Like Jim Jones.
Yeah.
Jonestown.
Textbook case. Initially, he pulled people in with this message of, racial equality, social justice, communal living, a utopian dream, seemingly.
Appealing stuff, especially at the time.
Very. But then he isolates them, takes them to Guyana, middle of nowhere, cuts off external ties.
Isolation.
Crucial step. And then he uses fear of the outside world, fake threats, paranoia to maintain absolute iron-fisted control.
Which ended in just horror. That mass suicide.
Yeah.
Over 900 people.
Unthinkable. And then you have someone like Marshall Applewhite, Heaven's Gate.
Right, the UFO guy. Claimed he was an alien messenger.
Yeah, promised transcendence, a ride on a spaceship hiding behind a comet.
And he convinced 39 people to take their own lives, believing it was the only way to reach the next level.
Exactly. So the research asks, what pushes people to that ultimate point, that final extreme step?
Yeah, what's the psychological switch that flips?
Well, the material suggests that by then, the psychological reprogramming essentially is often complete.
Through the love bombing, the gaslighting, the isolation.
All of it. The cult's reality is their only reality. For the Heaven's Gate members, that UFO wasn't just a belief, it was baked into their entire worldview. Suicide wasn't irrational within that framework, it was the logical step to achieve salvation.
So they're operating inside a completely different reality bubble.
Precisely. A reality constructed and controlled by the leader.
It's also just. The damage these groups leave behind, it's staggering. When they collapse, it's rarely quiet, is it?
No, never. The scars are profound. You see everything from, mass suicides like Jonestown.
Tragic deaths, people left behind. Orphan children sometimes.
Deeply traumatized survivors. And then there's the societal shock, the media frenzy. That can last for years. But the personal cost, for those directly involved, that's immeasurable.
For the survivors, what does that look like? What does the research say about their struggles afterwards?
It's immense. Our sources detail ongoing battles with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
So flashbacks, anxiety.
Severe anxiety, yeah. Emotional numbness sometimes. Difficulty trusting anyone.
And their sense of self, who they are.
Often shattered. They face these profound identity crises. Think about it. Years of having your individuality systematically erased, replaced by the group identity. They have to rebuild their entire sense of self from the ground up.
Just trying to reintegrate into normal society must be incredibly hard.
Hugely challenging. Sometimes takes years of therapy just to relearn basic things, like making independent decisions or navigating social cues outside the group's rules.
And the official response? Governments, law enforcement.
Often, frankly, scrambling after the fact. The research highlights that laws often haven't kept pace with the psychological manipulation. Physical abuse is one thing, but proving coercive control, psychological abuse, that insidious isolation, it's much harder legally.
So the system struggles to deal with it until it's often too late.
Sadly, yes. The damage is done before alarms are really raised effectively.
It's easy to just slap the label evil on these leaders, but do the sources give any insight into what makes them so magnetic, so appealing, at least initially, beyond just the manipulation tactics?
That's a really important nuance. And yes, the sources do suggest it's often because they do initially tap into something genuine.
Right.
Like those real human needs for community, for meaning, for purpose we talked about. They can seem incredibly insightful or visionary or deeply compassionate at first. That's part of the hook.
So it's not always obvious from the outset.
Rarely. And I think our fascination why these stories keep compelling us, even decades later.
Yeah, why do you keep coming back to them?
I think it stems from the horror of seeing something good, like belonging, get twisted into something so dark. It's the corruption of a fundamental human need.
Maybe there's a bit of psychological relatability there, too.
Absolutely. Most people, like we said, have felt lost or needed guidance at some point. That vulnerability is universal, so you see echoes of yourself, maybe.
Yeah. And there's also that moral gray area, isn't there? Where does sincere belief cross the line into just, manipulation?
Exactly. It's often blurry. Plus, these aren't just stories. They actually happened. Real people, real consequences. That adds a weight, a gravity that fiction doesn't have.
Right. And even now, There are still unanswered questions, aren't there? Psychological mysteries.
So many. We can analyze the patterns, but the why for each individual, it's complex. Why did they follow? Why that leader?
And maybe the most unsettling question the sources implicitly ask, the one we ask ourselves.
Could it happen to me?
Yeah. Could I be susceptible?
And bringing this all together for you, the listener, that's the chilling truth the research reveals, isn't it?
That under the right circumstances,
The right pressures, the right vulnerabilities, almost anyone could potentially fall into these belief systems that look utterly bizarre or horrifying from the outside.
it comes back to that formula.
That psychological recipe, yeah. Emotional vulnerability, the charismatic leader, the isolation, the black and white thinking, maybe some apocalyptic ideas thrown in. It's a dangerous mix.
It really is. And these stories, they blend everything: mystery, psychology, crime, tragedy.
Makes them endlessly fascinating, but also deeply unsettling.
And they serve as stark reminders of the scars, the lasting damage to survivors' PTSD, identity struggles.
And the societal impact, too, including how slow sometimes the official response can be to the psychological harm.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with.
Yeah.
These aren't just campfire stories about weird people doing weird things. Our sources really frame them as profound, cautionary tales.
Cautionary tales about what, specifically?
About power, about the seductive allure of absolute certainty, absolute belief, and about how fragile the human mind can sometimes be, maybe more fragile than we like to admit.
It really forces you to think about that question the sources pose, doesn't it? Could it happen to me?
Right. Makes you reflect on our own need for answers, for belonging, in a world that often feels very uncertain.
A sobering thought to end on.